In the neon-soaked streets of Seoul, where power is measured in blood and loyalty is bought with fear, two broken souls collide in the most unexpected way. Kim Min-jun, once the most feared mafia boss in Korea, now sits confined to a wheelchair, stripped of his throne but not his pride. Mirabelle Bernard, a black jazz singer fighting to survive in a city that sees her as invisible, saves his life on a rain-drenched night. When he asks her to marry him, she answers with a kiss that defies everything they've ever known. What follows is a love story written in gunfire and whispered promises, where redemption comes at the highest price. Will their love survive the shadows that hunt them, or will Seoul's underworld swallow them whole? Watch until the end to discover if love can truly conquer all. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more gripping stories, and comment below what you think will happen next. The rain hammered against the windows of Eclipse Lounge as Mirabelle pressed her back against the kitchen door, her heart threatening to burst through her ribcage. On the other side, broken glass crunched beneath heavy boots. Men shouted in rapid Korean, their voices sharp with violence. She clutched the neck of a broken bottle, its jagged edge catching the dim light filtering through the crack in the door. Kim Min-jun sat motionless in his wheelchair beside her, blood seeping through his white shirt where a knife had grazed his side. His face remained eerily calm, like a man who had stared down death so many times it had become an old acquaintance. When their eyes met in the darkness, something passed between them, a recognition of shared brokenness, of two people who understood what it meant to be discarded by the world. "You should leave," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the chaos. "They won't hurt you if you go now." Mirabelle shook her head, her braids swaying with emotion. "I'm not leaving you here to die." "Why?" The question carried genuine curiosity, as if he couldn't fathom why anyone would risk themselves for him. "Because you looked like you were ready to give up," she said simply. "And I know what that feels like." The footsteps grew closer. Min-jun's hand moved to the gun holstered beneath his jacket, but Mirabelle grabbed his wrist. "No more blood tonight," she pleaded. "There's a back exit through the storage room. Can you make it?" He nodded, and together they moved through the narrow corridors of the lounge, her pushing his wheelchair while he held his bleeding side. They emerged into an alley where rain fell in sheets, washing away the neon glow of Gangnam's nightlife. Mirabelle helped him into the back seat of his car, where his driver waited with engine running, eyes wide with panic. "Take us to the Itaewon house," Min-jun commanded, then turned to Mirabelle. "You're coming with me. It's not safe for you here anymore." She should have refused. Should have walked away from this man and whatever darkness followed him. But something in his eyes, a desperate loneliness that mirrored her own, made her climb into the car beside him. The mansion in Itaewon was a fortress disguised as elegance. High walls topped with security cameras, guards stationed at every entrance, yet inside the decor was surprisingly warm, traditional Korean art mixed with modern minimalism. Mirabelle helped Min-jun onto a leather sofa while he directed her to a medical kit in the study. "You've done this before," he observed as she cleaned and dressed his wound with practiced efficiency. "My father was a doctor," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "Before he died. He used to patch up people in our neighborhood who couldn't afford the hospital. And now you sing in lounges where men like me bring violence to your doorstep." She finally looked at him, really looked at him. Despite the wheelchair, despite the blood and the danger, there was something magnetic about Kim Min-jun. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic features, his eyes dark and penetrating. But it was the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide that drew her in, the way his jaw tightened when he shifted his useless legs, the haunted look that flickered across his face when he thought no one was watching. "Why did those men attack you?" she asked, finishing the bandage. "Because I'm weak now," he said bitterly. "Because a king without legs is no king at all. My own brother sent them to finish what the ambush started 6 months ago." "Your brother?" "Kim Tae-sung. He runs the Biko clan now. My clan. Or what used to be mine before a rival family planted a bomb in my car and left me like this." He gestured dismissively at his wheelchair. "In this world, Mirabelle, weakness is a death sentence. And I've been living on borrowed time." She sat back on her heels, studying him. "Then why keep fighting? Why not disappear, start over somewhere else?" "Because disappearing means admitting defeat. It means all the blood on my hands, all the terrible things I've done, were for nothing. His voice cracked slightly. And if it was all for nothing, then I'm just a monster. At least if I reclaim my throne, I can tell myself there was a purpose. The raw honesty in his words stunned her. This wasn't the cold, calculating mafia boss everyone whispered about. This was a man drowning in guilt and grasping for meaning in the wreckage of his life. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard, she whispered. They sat in silence for a long moment, the sound of rain against the windows filling the space between them. Then Minjun reached out and took her hand, his fingers surprisingly gentle. I want to ask you something, he said. And I need you to understand that I'm completely serious. Okay, marry me. Mirabelle laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. You're insane. We just met. I don't even know you. I know. But I've spent the last 6 months wanting to die, and tonight, for the first time since the explosion, I felt something other than rage or emptiness. You could have run when those men attacked. Instead, you saved me. You didn't see a cripple or a criminal. You just saw a man who needed help. That's not a reason to get married. Maybe not. But I'm 42 years old, Mirabelle. I've built an empire, destroyed my enemies, lived a life most men only dream about in their darkest fantasies. And none of it meant anything until a beautiful woman with kind eyes told me I looked like I was ready to give up. He squeezed her hand. I don't know what love is. I'm not sure I'm capable of it. But I know I want to find out, and I want to find out with you. She should have said no. Should have walked out of that mansion and never looked back. But Mirabelle Bernard had come to Seoul 3 years ago chasing a dream of jazz clubs and artistic freedom, only to find herself invisible in a city that didn't know what to do with a black woman who refused to fit into neat categories. She'd been lonely for so long, singing for crowds that never really saw her. And here was a man dangerous, broken, impossible, who saw her clearly. So instead of answering with words, she leaned forward and kissed him. Soft at first, tentative, like testing the waters of an unknown ocean. Then deeper, with all the loneliness and hunger that had been building inside her for years. His hand came up to cup her face, and she felt him tremble slightly, as if he too had forgotten what genuine tenderness felt like. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Minjun's expression had transformed. The haunted look was gone, replaced by something fierce and determined. I'll take that as a yes, he murmured. Don't make me regret this, she replied, her voice shaking. I can't promise you safety or normalcy, but I can promise that every day I have left, I'll try to be worthy of that kiss. The next weeks unfolded like a fever dream. Mirabelle moved into the Itaewon mansion, though she kept her apartment in Hongdae as an escape route her rational mind insisted she needed. During the day, she helped Minjun with physical therapy, painful, frustrating sessions where he pushed his body to its limits, trying to regain some mobility in his legs. The doctors said he'd never walk normally again, but Minjun refused to accept that verdict. Tell me about New Orleans, he said one afternoon as she helped him through stretching exercises. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort. What do you want to know? Everything. What it smells like, what the music sounds like, why you left. So she told him. About growing up in the Tremaine neighborhood, where jazz spilled out of every doorway and her grandmother's gumbo could make you weep. About singing in clubs on Frenchman Street, where tourists and locals mixed in a beautiful chaos of music and joy. About her father's death from a heart attack when she was 23, and how the city that had once felt like home became a tomb of memories. I needed to start over somewhere completely different, she explained. Korea felt like another planet. I thought maybe I could reinvent myself, become someone new. But everywhere I went, people stared. On the subway, in cafes, walking down the street. I was always foreign, always other. The only place I felt normal was on stage, singing. Music is the one language that doesn't care what you look like. Minjun listened intently, his dark eyes never leaving her face. I understand that feeling. Of being trapped by what people expect you to be. You were a king. I was a role, he corrected. The ruthless Kim Minjun, the man who never showed mercy, never showed weakness. I played that part so well I forgot who I was underneath. And then the explosion happened, and suddenly the costume didn't fit anymore. I couldn't be the invincible boss from a wheelchair. So what was left? She knelt beside him, taking his hands in hers. Maybe the explosion gave you permission to find out. Their relationship deepened with surprising speed. In the evenings, Mirabelle sang for him old jazz standards, blues numbers, sometimes gospel songs her grandmother had taught her. Minjun would sit perfectly still, eyes closed, letting her voice wash over him like absolution. Sometimes she caught him crying silently, tears streaming down his face as she sang about love and loss and redemption. "Your voice is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," he told her one night. "It sounds like forgiveness." But the outside world wasn't content to leave them in peace. Word spread through Seoul's underworld that Kim Min-jun had taken a foreign mistress, and his brother Taesung was furious. The younger Kim was everything Min-jun used to be: ruthless, ambitious, uncompromising. He'd built the Biko clan into an even more powerful force in the 6 months since taking over, and he viewed his crippled brother as both a threat and an embarrassment. Taesung came to the mansion on a cold November evening, flanked by 6 armed men. Mirabelle was upstairs when she heard raised voices in Korean, the sharp, aggressive tone unmistakable. She crept to the top of the stairs, listening. "You've become pathetic," Taesung spat. "Playing house with some foreign whore while I do the real work. The other families are laughing at us because of you." "I don't care what they think anymore," Min-jun replied calmly. "I'm done with that life." "You don't get to be done. You're a Kim. That means something, or did you forget between spreading your legs for that black bitch?" The sound of a gunshot exploded through the house. Mirabelle screamed and ran down the stairs to find Min-jun holding a pistol, a bullet hole in the wall inches from Taesung's head. His wheelchair was turned to face his brother, his expression utterly cold. "Leave," Min-jun said quietly. "And if you ever speak about her that way again, I'll put the next bullet through your skull, brother or not." Taesung's face twisted with rage, but he backed toward the door. "You've signed her death warrant. And yours. Enjoy your little fantasy while you can." After they left, Mirabelle found Min-jun in his study, staring out at the Seoul skyline. She approached slowly, seeing the tension in every line of his body. "I'm putting you in danger," he said without turning. "You should leave. I'll give you money, help you get out of the country." "No, Mirabelle. No." She moved to stand in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm not running because your brother is an asshole. I knew what I was getting into when I kissed you. Or at least, I knew it would be complicated." "Complicated?" He laughed bitterly. "My brother just threatened to kill you. That's not complicated, that's suicide. Then we'll be suicidal together." She cupped his face in her hands. "You said you wanted to find out what love is. Well, this is part of it. Love means staying when it gets hard. It means not running at the first sign of danger. I can't protect you like this." He gestured angrily at his wheelchair. "I can barely protect myself. Maybe I don't need you to protect me. Maybe I just need you to be honest with me. About everything." So he told her. About growing up in the Biko clan, watching his father rule with an iron fist. About his first kill at 17 and how he'd vomited afterward. About building his reputation through calculated violence and strategic alliances, always staying one step ahead of rivals and police. About the dozens of deaths he'd ordered, the families he'd destroyed, the corruption he'd spread through Seoul's institutions like cancer. "I'm not a good man," he finished. "I've done terrible things, and I can't take them back. The wheelchair doesn't change that. If anything, it just means I have to live with the memories instead of dying gloriously in some gunfight." Mirabelle was quiet for a long time, processing everything. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. "I'm not going to tell you that your past doesn't matter or that love erases all sins. But I believe people can change. I have to believe that, or what's the point? If we're all just stuck being whatever we were at our worst, then there's no hope for anyone. You're too good for me." "Probably," she agreed with a small smile. "But you're stuck with me now. So we might as well make the best of it." They made love that night for the first time, a tender, desperate act that felt like sealing a pact. Afterward, lying in his bed with her head on his chest, Mirabelle felt his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I'm going to reclaim the clan," he said softly. "Not because I want power, but because it's the only way to keep you safe. As long as Taesung is in charge, we'll never have peace." She wanted to argue, to tell him there was another way. But she'd seen the resolve in his eyes. Kim Min-jun was going to war, and nothing she said would stop him. The next month was a blur of secret meetings and careful planning. Minjun began reaching out to old allies, men who'd served under him before the explosion. Many had shifted their loyalty to Taesung, but some remembered the old boss and were willing to listen. Mirabelle watched him transform back into the cold, calculating strategist, though he was never that way with her. In her presence, he remained soft and vulnerable, the mask dropping to reveal the man beneath. She continued singing at Eclipse Lounge, maintaining the appearance of normalcy even as storm clouds gathered. The manager, an older Korean woman named Mrs. Park, pulled her aside one night after her set. "I don't know what's going on with you and Kim Min-jun," she said in careful English. "But be careful. Men like him, they destroy everything they touch. Even the things they love." "He's not like that anymore," Mirabelle protested. Mrs. Park's expression was sad. "Honey, men like that never change. They just find new reasons to do the same old things. I've lived in the city for 60 years. I've seen this story play out 100 times. It always ends the same way, with blood and tears." Mirabelle wanted to argue, but the older woman's words haunted her. Was she being naive? Was she so desperate for connection that she'd blinded herself to who Min-jun really was? That night, she found him in his study, surrounded by documents and photographs. Intelligence on Taesung's operations, maps of territories, financial records. The detritus of war. "When?" she asked simply. He looked up, understanding immediately. 3 days. We move against his main operations in Gangnam. Cut off his income. Force him to negotiate from a position of weakness. And if he doesn't negotiate, then I kill him. The casual way he said it made her stomach turn. "He's your brother." He stopped being my brother the moment he tried to finish what the bomb started. Minjun's expression was hard, unreadable. "This is the world I live in, Mirabelle. The world I've always lived in. I warned you it was ugly. Will you go yourself?" "To the raid." "I have to. My men need to see me leading, to know I'm not just sending them to die while I hide. Even from this wheelchair, I can still pull a trigger." She felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll come back. Promise me this won't be the night you decide to die gloriously." He wheeled closer, taking her hands in his. "I promise. I have too much to live for now." The night of the raid, Mirabelle waited at the mansion in an agony of uncertainty. The house staff moved quietly around her, bringing tea she didn't drink, offering comfort she couldn't accept. She sat in Minjun's study, surrounded by his books and papers, trying to pray to a god she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. Please, she thought desperately. Please let him come home. Please let this end without more death. But prayers rarely work the way we want them to. The call came at 2 in the morning. Not from Minjun, but from one of his men. There had been an ambush. Taesung had known they were coming. The raid had turned into a bloodbath. Men dead on both sides. And Minjun was missing. Mirabelle's world tilted sideways. She grabbed her jacket and ran for the door, but the guards stopped her. Too dangerous, they said. They'd find him, they promised. She should wait there where it was safe. She screamed at them in English and broken Korean, crying, begging, demanding they let her go. Finally, the head of security agreed to drive her to the scene, though he made her stay in the car. The Gangnam warehouse district was chaos. Police cars, ambulances, bodies covered with sheets. Mirabelle scanned every face, terrified she'd see Minjun among the dead. Then someone shouted, and she saw movement in a nearby alley. She ran before anyone could stop her, her heart hammering. And there he was propped against a wall, his wheelchair overturned beside him, blood soaking his shirt. But alive. God alive. Mirabelle, he gasped as she dropped to her knees beside him. You shouldn't be here. Shut up. Where are you hit? Shoulder and side. I'll live. He managed a pained smile. Told you I'd come back. She pressed her hands against his wounds, trying to stop the bleeding, tears streaming down her face. You idiot. You complete idiot. I know. I'm sorry. The ambulance arrived, and paramedics loaded him onto a stretcher. Mirabelle rode with him to the hospital, holding his hand the entire way. In the harsh fluorescent light, she could see how pale he'd become, how much blood he'd lost. If you die, she whispered fiercely, I'll never forgive you. Then I guess I'll have to live. He survived surgery, but the doctors were grave. The bullet to his shoulder had done significant damage. Combined with his existing injuries, his prognosis was uncertain. He'd need months of recovery, and even then, full recovery was unlikely. Taesung had escaped in the chaos. His organization was weakened, but not destroyed. The war would continue. But something had shifted in Minjun. Lying in that hospital bed, hooked up to machines, he seemed to finally understand the futility of his quest for power. "I almost died," he said to Mirabelle one night, his voice hoarse. "And the only thing I could think about was that I'd never hear you sing again. Not about the clan, not about revenge. Just your voice." "So what do we do?" she asked. "We run. We disappear somewhere Taesung can't find us. Start over." "You'd really give it all up? For you?" In a heartbeat, they began planning their escape. A small coastal town near Busan where Minjun owned property under a false name. Somewhere they could live quietly, away from the violence and power struggles of Seoul. It felt like a dream, too good to be true. And it was. 3 days before they were set to leave, Taesung made his move. It was early morning when armed men breached the mansion's security. Mirabelle woke to the sound of gunfire and Minjun shouting orders to his guards. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a hidden panic room in his bedroom. "Get in," he commanded. "Don't come out until my men give the all-clear." "No, I'm not hiding while you. Please." His eyes were desperate. "Please, Mirabelle. I can't fight if I'm worried about you. I need to know you're safe." So she climbed into the panic room, a small reinforced space with supplies and communication equipment. The door sealed behind her, cutting off the sounds of battle. She could only wait in the darkness, praying once again to that distant god. Hours passed. She monitored the security cameras, watching in horror as Minjun's men fought desperately against overwhelming numbers. Taesung had brought an army. This wasn't a raid, it was an extermination. She saw Minjun in his wheelchair, gun in hand, defending the main hall. Saw him take down 3 men before they finally overwhelmed him. Saw them drag him away, unconscious, bleeding. Mirabelle screamed, pounding on the door, but it wouldn't open. The panic room was designed to keep her safe, but it had become a prison. She was forced to watch helplessly as they ransacked the house, looking for her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sounds faded. The security feed showed empty rooms, bodies of Minjun's men lying where they'd fallen. Everyone was gone, including Minjun. The door unlocked automatically after 12 hours, programmed to release if no one manually extended the lockdown. Mirabelle emerged into a nightmare. Blood stained the marble floors, bullet holes pocked the walls. The beautiful mansion had become a tomb. She found a phone that still worked and called the only person she could think of, Mrs. Park from the lounge. "They took him," Mirabelle sobbed. "Taesung took him, and I don't know where." Mrs. Park arrived within the hour, bringing food and comfort and practical advice. She made calls to people in her network, old contacts from decades of living in Seoul's underbelly. Slowly, information trickled in. Taesung was holding Minjun at an abandoned dockyard in Incheon, planning to execute him the following night as a message to anyone who might challenge his authority. "You need to leave the country," Mrs. Park said gently. "There's nothing you can do for him now." But Mirabelle shook her head. "I can't abandon him. He wouldn't abandon me. He'd want you to live. Then he should have thought of that before asking me to marry him." She spent the rest of the day gathering what she needed. Money from Minjun's safe, a gun she barely knew how to use, the address of the dockyard. Mrs. Park tried to stop her, but finally gave up, agreeing only to drive her there. "This is suicide," the older woman said as they drove through the night toward Incheon. "Probably," Mirabelle agreed. "But I have to try. If I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened if I'd been brave enough." The dockyard was exactly as grim as she'd imagined: rusted shipping containers, broken streetlights, the smell of salt and decay. Mrs. Park parked a few blocks away, engine running for a quick escape. "I'll wait here for 30 minutes, she said. "If you're not back by then, I'm calling the police." Mirabelle nodded, checking the gun one last time. Her hands were shaking. She'd never been violent in her life, had always believed there was a better way than bloodshed. But love, she was discovering, made you capable of things you never thought possible. She moved through the shadows, following distant voices speaking in rapid Korean. Found a spot behind a container where she could see without being seen. And there was Minjun, tied to a chair in the center of a cleared space, his face bruised and swollen. Taesung stood in front of him, speaking in a voice too low for her to hear. Mirabelle's finger tightened on the trigger. She could shoot Taesung from here. Maybe kill him before his men reacted. But she was a jazz singer from New Orleans, not an assassin. The gun felt foreign in her hands, like it belonged to someone else's story. Before she could decide, Taesung pulled out his own weapon and pressed it to Minjun's temple. Her heart stopped. This was it. She was about to watch the man she loved die. Then Minjun spoke, loud enough for her to hear. Do you really think killing me makes you stronger? I'm already dead, brother. The moment I chose love over power, I stopped being the person you're trying to destroy. Love. Taesung laughed. You're pathetic. That woman made you weak. No, Minjun said softly. She made me human again. And I'm grateful I got to feel that before the end. Mirabelle couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Could only react. She stepped out from behind the container, gun raised, voice steady despite her terror. Let him go. Every gun in the yard swiveled to point at her. Taesung's expression was almost amused. So the foreign whore comes to rescue her crippled prince. How romantic. I said let him go. Or what? You'll shoot me? I have 10 men here. You have 1 bullet, maybe 2 before they kill you. The math doesn't work out in your favor. He was right, of course. This was foolish, suicidal. But Mirabelle had discovered something in that moment. She'd rather die trying to save Minjun than live knowing she'd done nothing. Maybe I can't save him, she said. But I can make sure you don't get to enjoy your victory. So here's my offer. Let him go, and I'll walk away. Kill him, and I kill you too. We can all die together. Taesung studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. You know what? I believe you. You're crazy enough to do it. He lowered his gun from Minjun's head. But I'm not letting him go. He challenged my authority. That can't stand unpunished. Then punish me instead. Mirabelle, no. Minjun shouted, struggling against his bonds. She ignored him, keeping her eyes on Taesung. I'm the one who made him weak, right? So take it out on me. Let him watch. That'll hurt him more than a bullet ever could. For a terrible moment, Taesung actually seemed to consider it. Then he shook his head. You're right that watching you die would destroy him. But I'm not that cruel. I'm just going to kill you both and be done with this whole mess. He raised his gun again, and time seemed to slow. Mirabelle saw Minjun's face contorted with helpless rage. Saw Taesung's finger begin to squeeze the trigger. Saw her own short life flash before her eyes, New Orleans, her father's funeral, the airplane to Seoul, that first night at Eclipse Lounge, Minjun's eyes when she'd kissed him. The gunshot was deafening. But it didn't come from Taesung's gun. One of his men collapsed, blood blooming on his chest. Then another shot, another man down. Chaos erupted as Minjun's remaining loyalists, men Mirabelle didn't know were still alive, emerged from hiding and opened fire. In the confusion, Mirabelle ran to Minjun, cutting his bonds with a knife she found on the ground. He grabbed her face, kissing her desperately. When this is over, I'm going to kill you for being so stupid, he gasped. Get in line, she replied. They made it to Mrs. Park's car in the chaos, bullets whizzing past them. Minjun's men held off Taesung's forces just long enough for them to escape into the night. Mrs. Park drove like a woman possessed, weaving through Incheon streets until they were sure they weren't being followed. Where to? She asked. Busan, Minjun said. The safe house. We'll hide there until we can figure out our next move. But they all knew the truth. There was no next move. Taesung would never stop hunting them. The only way this ended was with one brother dead. The safe house in Busan was a small apartment overlooking the ocean, furnished simply but comfortably. For a week, they lived in limbo, sleeping in shifts, jumping at every sound, waiting for the inevitable. Minjun's injuries had worsened from the torture and the escape. He could barely move now without crying out in pain. Mirabelle tended to him as best she could, but they both knew he needed proper medical care. I'm dying, he said one night as they lay together in the darkness, listening to waves crash against the shore. Don't say that. It's true. I can feel it. The infection from my wounds, the damage from the explosion catching up with me. Even if Taesung doesn't find us, I don't have much time left. She pressed her face against his chest, trying not to cry. Then we'll make the most of whatever time we have. I need you to promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, you have to live. Really live. Go back to singing. Find someone who can give you the life you deserve. Don't let my memory chain you to grief. How can you ask me that? Because I love you. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. Because in the short time we had together, you gave me more joy than I deserved. And I want you to be happy, even if I can't be there to see it. They made love that night with desperate tenderness, as if trying to press every moment of happiness into their skin, to carry it forward into whatever came next. The end came 3 days later. Taesung had found them. His men surrounded the building, cutting off all escape routes. Minjun received a call on his burner phone, his brother's voice, offering one final chance. Surrender yourself, and I'll let her go. You have my word. Minjun looked at Mirabelle, his eyes full of terrible resolve. She knew immediately what he was planning. No, she said firmly. We stay together. This is the only way to keep you safe. I don't care about being safe. I care about being with you. They argued for precious minutes until finally, Minjun played his final card. He pulled out a small recording device, hit record, and began to speak. Mirabelle Bernard. I don't have the words to tell you what you've meant to me. You took a dead man and taught him how to feel again. You showed me that there was more to life than power and revenge. Every moment with you is a gift I didn't deserve, but will treasure for whatever eternity awaits men like me. He paused, coughing, blood flecking his lips. I need you to understand something. What I'm about to do isn't about giving up or accepting defeat. It's about making sure you get to live. Because your life, your voice, your beautiful spirit, that matters more than anything I've ever built or destroyed. Tears streamed down Mirabelle's face. Please don't do this. Don't wait for me. Don't mourn me forever. Sing, Mirabelle. Sing the way you did that first night at Eclipse Lounge, like your voice could heal the world. And sometimes, when you're on stage and the music is perfect, remember that somewhere, somehow, I'm listening. He turned off the recorder and handed it to her. Then he kissed her one last time soft, lingering, tasting of salt and blood and goodbye. I love you, he whispered against her lips. More than I thought I could love anything. Before she could respond, he called out to his men waiting in the next room. Told them to take Mirabelle through the basement exit while he surrendered to Taesung. She fought them, screaming, but they were stronger. The last thing she saw before they carried her away was Minjun wheeling himself toward the front door, shoulders squared, facing his death with dignity. They got her onto a boat, then a car, then a train. Mrs. Park met her in Seoul with passport, money, and plane ticket. A full escape plan Minjun had apparently been preparing for weeks. He knew it would end this way, Mrs. Park said gently. He wanted to make sure you'd be safe. Mirabelle wanted to refuse, to go back, to die with him if that's what fate demanded. But she could hear his voice in her head, begging her to live. So she got on the plane back to the United States, carrying nothing but a small bag and the recording device with his final message. The flight to New Orleans felt like traveling through a dream. Or maybe a nightmare. Mirabelle sat in her window seat, staring at nothing, the recording device clutched in her hands like a talisman. Other passengers gave her worried looks, this woman with tears streaming silently down her face, whispering words in Korean she barely understood herself. She didn't know if Minjun was already dead. Didn't know if Taesung had kept his word and let her escape. All she knew was that the man she loved had sacrificed himself so she could live, and now she had to figure out how to honor that gift. New Orleans in December was warm compared to Seoul's winter chill. The city embraced her like an old friend, familiar and strange at once. She'd been gone 3 years, but it felt like a lifetime. She was not the same woman who'd left chasing dreams of reinvention. She stayed with her cousin in the 9th Ward, spending the first weeks in a fog of grief. At night, she listened to Minjun's recording over and over until she'd memorized every word, every pause, every breath. During the day, she walked the streets of her childhood, trying to remember who she'd been before Seoul, before Eclipse Lounge, before Kim Minjun. Mrs. Park called once, 3 weeks after Mirabelle's return. Her voice was heavy with sorrow. It's done, she said simply. I'm sorry. Mirabelle had known, of course. Had felt it in her bones the moment the plane took off from Incheon. But hearing it confirmed shattered something in her chest that she'd been desperately trying to hold together. How? She whispered. The way he wanted. Standing sitting in front of his brother. They say he never begged, never showed fear. Just asked Taesung to remember they'd once been family before all this. Then he closed his eyes and Mrs. Park's voice broke. They found a white rose in his jacket pocket. Instructions to send it to you. The rose arrived 2 days later, preserved and pressed in a small wooden box. No note, no explanation. It didn't need one. For months, Mirabelle barely existed. She went through the motions of living, eating, sleeping, breathing, but it all felt mechanical, meaningless. Her cousin worried about her, suggested therapy, medication, anything to bring her back from the edge. You can't mourn forever, baby, her cousin said gently. He wouldn't want that for you. How do you know what he'd want? Because you told me. You played me that recording, remember? He wanted you to sing. So when are you going to sing? The question haunted her. She'd been a singer her entire adult life, but now the thought of performing felt impossible. How could she stand on stage and pour out her heart when her heart was broken beyond repair? But slowly, gradually, the music began calling her back. She'd hear a saxophone on the street and feel something stir in her chest. She'd catch herself humming old jazz standards while cooking dinner. The need to create, to express, to connect through song, it was too fundamental to stay buried forever. 6 months after returning to New Orleans, Mirabelle walked into a small jazz club in the Marigny and asked if they needed a singer. The owner, an old man named Baptiste who remembered her from before, looked her up and down with shrewd eyes. You look like you've been through hell and back, girl. Something like that. Good. The best singers always have. You start Friday night. That Friday, Mirabelle stood on a tiny stage in front of maybe 30 people and sang for the first time since Soul. She chose I'll Be Seeing You, a song about love and loss and memory. Her voice cracked on the first few notes, rusty from disuse and thick with emotion. But then something opened up inside her, and the music poured out like water breaking through a dam. She sang about Minjun without saying his name. Sang about Seoul's neon lights and rain-soaked streets. Sang about loving someone impossible and losing them anyway. Sang about the way grief hollows you out but somehow, if you let it, teaches you to hold more beauty than you ever thought possible. When she finished, the small crowd was silent. Then someone started clapping, and someone else joined in, and suddenly everyone was on their feet. Baptiste came over with tears in his eyes. Whatever happened to you in Korea, he said, it made you sing like an angel who's seen the devil. She laughed, a broken, genuine sound. That's exactly what happened. Word spread quickly. The girl who'd left New Orleans chasing dreams had come back transformed, her voice carrying weight and depth that stopped people in their tracks. Offers came from bigger venues, better gigs. Within a year, Mirabelle was headlining at Snug Harbor, one of the city's premier jazz clubs. But success felt hollow without Minjun there to see it. She performed to packed houses, received standing ovations, got written up in the Times-Picayune, and all she could think was that he'd promised to listen, wherever he was. She started ending every show the same way. After her final song, she'd pull out the white rose from his jacket, now dried and fragile, but still intact, and place it on the piano. A ritual. A remembrance. A way of saying, I kept my promise. I'm singing. Are you listening? Her audiences didn't understand the gesture, but they respected it. That rose became part of her mystique, the beautiful singer with the tragic past, the woman who sang like her heart was breaking and healing simultaneously. 2 years after leaving Seoul, Mirabelle was invited to perform at the New Orleans Jazz Festival, one of the biggest honors a local musician could receive. She stood backstage on a perfect April day, listening to the crowd noise, feeling Minjun's absence like a physical weight. You would have loved this, she whispered to the air, to his memory, to whatever part of him still existed somewhere. You would have sat in the front row with that serious expression, trying not to smile. But I would have seen it in your eyes. She walked on stage to thunderous applause, took her place at the microphone, and looked out at thousands of faces. And for just a moment, she could have sworn she saw him there in the crowd, a figure in the shadows, watching with pride and love and eternal goodbye. But when she blinked, he was gone. Of course he was. Kim Minjun was dead, buried in a grave she'd never visit in a country that had taken everything and given her the most devastating love of her life. She sang "What a Wonderful World" that day, finding hope in Louis Armstrong's optimistic lyrics even though her own world had been shattered. Because that's what Minjun had wanted, for her to find beauty again, to live fully, to not let his death define her. After the festival performance, as she was packing up backstage, someone handed her an envelope. No return address, no name. Inside was a photograph she'd never seen before, Minjun in his wheelchair outside Eclipse Lounge, looking up at something out of frame with an expression of pure wonder. She knew without being told that he'd been watching her perform that night before they'd ever spoken. On the back, in handwriting she didn't recognize, someone had written in English, "He bought this from a photographer on the street. Kept it in his wallet. Thought you should have it. A friend." Mirabelle pressed the photo to her chest and finally let herself cry, not the desperate, angry tears of fresh grief, but something softer. Acceptance. Gratitude. The bittersweet acknowledgement that loving Minjun had changed her irrevocably, had broken and rebuilt her into someone stronger, deeper, more capable of holding both joy and sorrow. She returned to the club circuit with renewed purpose. Started writing her own songs, jazz-influenced pieces about soul, about love across impossible divides, about finding redemption in the wreckage. Her debut album, recorded a year later, was titled Eclipse, a tribute to the lounge where everything had begun. The title track became her signature song. "In the eclipse of your shadow, I learned to shine. In the darkness of your past, I found my light. You taught me love is not about the time we get, but what we do with every borrowed breath. And though you're gone, you're in every note I sing, in every heart I touch, every soul that takes wing." Critics called it haunting. Audiences called it transcendent. Mirabelle called it survival. She never married again. Had brief relationships over the years, good men who treated her well, who wanted to build futures with her. But none of them understood the part of her soul that still belonged to a Korean mafia boss in a wheelchair who'd chosen her over power, who died so she could live. "Don't you want to move on?" her cousin asked one night over wine. "I have moved on," Mirabelle replied. "Moving on doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying him with me in a way that adds to my life instead of subtracting from it." 5 years after Seoul, Mirabelle received an unexpected email. It was from Mrs. Park, now retired and living in Jeju Island. She'd attached a video file with a simple message, "I think you're finally ready to see this." The video was security footage from the Itaewon mansion, dated the day before Minjun's final stand. It showed him in his study, late at night, recording something on his phone. Not the message she already had, but something different. She downloaded it with shaking hands and pressed play. Minjun's face filled the screen, looking tired but peaceful. "Hello, my love. If you're seeing this, then I'm gone and Mrs. Park has decided you're strong enough to hear what I need to say. First, I'm sorry. Sorry for the danger, the pain, the impossible situation I put you in. You deserved better than a broken man with too many enemies and not enough time. But I'm not sorry for loving you. That's the one thing I did right in my miserable life. Loving you taught me that redemption isn't about erasing the past, it's about what you choose to do with whatever future you have left. And I chose you. Every time I chose you. I know you'll sing again. You're too full of music to stay silent forever. And when you do, I want you to know something. Every note you sing is a victory over the darkness that tried to destroy us both. Every performance is proof that love survives even when the lovers don't. Every audience you move is me, living on through you. Don't carry me as a burden, Mirabelle. Carry me as wings. Let what we had lift you higher than you ever thought possible. And if you ever doubt whether I'm listening, just close your eyes and feel the music. I'll be there in every beat, every breath, every beautiful moment. Live enough for both of us. Love enough for both of us. Sing enough for both of us. That's all I ask. You were my eclipse, Mirabelle Bernard. The moment of darkness that revealed all the stars I'd been too blind to see. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything. Now go sing. The world is waiting. The video ended. Mirabelle sat in her New Orleans apartment, 7,000 miles and 5 years away from that Itaewon study, and smiled through her tears. Because she understood now what Minjun had been trying to tell her all along. Their love story didn't end with his death. It transformed, evolved, became something bigger than both of them. She went to Snug Harbor that night for her regular Thursday performance. The club was packed, as always. She took the stage, placed the white rose on the piano, and spoke to her audience, something she rarely did. "I want to tell you about a man I loved," she began. "His name was Kim Min-jun, and he saved my life by ending his own. For a long time, I thought that meant I had to carry his memory like a weight, had to honor him by staying stuck in grief. But I finally understand what he was really asking me to do." She looked out at the expectant faces, feeling Min-jun's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. He was asking me to be free, to take all the love he gave me and spread it out into the world through my music, to turn our tragedy into beauty, our pain into art, our loss into something that helps other people feel less alone. "So that's what I'm going to do. Starting tonight." She nodded to her band, and they launched into a new song she'd written just that day, listening about a love that transcends death, about promises kept across impossible distances, about the way music connects us to those we've lost. And as she sang, Mirabelle felt something shift inside her. Not healing, she'd never fully heal from losing Min-jun. But transformation. Evolution. The metamorphosis of grief into grace. After the show, a young woman approached her with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "I lost my husband 2 years ago. I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again. But your music, it helps." That's when Mirabelle finally understood the full weight of Min-jun's gift. He hadn't just given her permission to live, he'd given her a purpose. To take the love they'd shared and multiply it, spread it to every person who needed to know that surviving loss was possible, that beauty could bloom from the deepest pain. She sang for 30 more years, building a career that touched millions of lives. Won Grammys, performed at Carnegie Hall, became an elder stateswoman of jazz. But her most treasured performances were always the intimate ones, in small clubs like Eclipse Lounge, where she could see the faces of the broken and the grieving and sing directly to their souls. The white rose stayed with her through it all, carefully preserved, a talisman of impossible love. And though it grew more fragile with each passing year, it never completely fell apart, much like Mirabelle herself. When she was 72 years old, performing at a festival in Seoul, her first return to the city in decades, something extraordinary happened. As she sang Eclipse to a crowd that spanned generations, she looked out into the audience and saw a young man in the front row, watching her with intense, familiar eyes. After the show, he approached her backstage. "Miss Bernard? My name is Kim Ji-hun. I was Kim Min-jun's nephew. Taesung's son." Mirabelle's heart stopped. "You look like him." "I know. I've seen pictures." He pulled out an envelope, hands shaking. "My father died 5 years ago. Before he passed, he gave me this and made me promise to deliver it to you if you ever came back to Seoul. He said he owed you an apology." Inside the envelope was a letter in careful English. "Miss Bernard, I killed my brother. That fact has haunted me every day for the past 45 years. But what haunts me more is knowing that I almost killed you too, almost destroyed the woman who made Min-jun's last months on Earth bearable. I was wrong. About everything. About power, about loyalty, about what makes a man strong. Min-jun understood something I didn't, that loving someone enough to sacrifice yourself, that's true power. And you loved him the same way. This doesn't absolve me of anything. I just wanted you to know that your love for my brother changed him, and watching that change from a distance changed me too. Too late, too little. But still, thank you for making his death mean something. Thank you for living the life he wanted you to live. And thank you for this music, which has helped my son through his own darkness. Kim Taesung." Mirabelle looked at Ji-hun, this young man who carried the blood of both the brother who loved her and the brother who killed him. "What happened to your father?" "Cancer. But I think really it was guilt that killed him. He talked about Uncle Min-jun all the time near the end. About how he threw away family for power and ended up with neither." Ji-hun's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "He made me promise to be different. To choose love over violence. Your music helped me understand what that meant." She pulled him into a hug, this piece of Min-jun's legacy she'd never expected to meet. "He'd be proud of you. They both would be. Would you?" Ji-hun hesitated. "Would you tell me about him? About who he really was before everything?" So Mirabelle sat down with Kim Ji-hun in her dressing room in Seoul, 30 years after Kim Min-jun's death, and told stories about the man who'd loved her across every divide. About his vulnerability, his humor, his desperate desire for redemption. About the way he looked at her when she sang, like she was performing miracles. About his final sacrifice and the gift of life he'd given her. They talked for hours, two people connected by love and loss, and the complicated legacy of violence. And somewhere, Mirabelle thought, Minjun was listening, was smiling, was at peace knowing that his memory had become something redemptive rather than destructive. She performed in Seoul 3 more times before age finally forced her to retire. Each time, she placed the white rose on the piano and sang Eclipse, her voice cracked with age, but still carrying the weight of lived experience, of love survived, of promises kept. At 80, Mirabelle Bernard finally set down her microphone. But she never stopped singing, humming old standards while cooking dinner, teaching young musicians about jazz and resilience, telling anyone who'd listen about the Korean mafia boss who'd taught her that love was the only power worth dying for. The white rose sat on her mantel, in a glass case Ji-hun had custom-made for her. And on quiet evenings, she'd sit in front of it with a glass of wine and talk to Minjun like he was still there. "We did it," she'd say. "We turned all that pain into something beautiful. We won." And in the silence that followed, she could almost hear his reply, "No, my love. You won. I just showed you how." When Mirabelle passed away peacefully in her sleep at 86, they found her with the white rose clutched in her hand and Minjun's photograph on her chest. Her will specified that both be buried with her, along with a recording device containing his final message. But her music, their music, the legacy of a love that defied every odd that lived on. In the students she'd taught, the audiences she'd moved, the broken hearts she'd helped heal. In every note of Eclipse still played on jazz stations around the world. In every person who heard her story and believed that love could transcend violence, that beauty could bloom from tragedy, that singing was the highest form of prayer. Kim Minjun had given Mirabelle Bernard the gift of life. And she'd taken that gift and multiplied it 1,000,000 times over, spreading light in the darkness, finding hope in the ruins, proving that love real, impossible, devastating love never truly dies. It just transforms into music. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more captivating tales of love, loss, and redemption. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought about Mirabelle and Minjun's journey. Your thoughts mean the world to us. And share this story with someone who needs to hear that even the most broken hearts can learn to sing again. Thank you for watching, and remember, love always leaves an echo.